fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCP 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren, and Mr. David North Martino is here.
Yeah. All three names.
Yeah.
Once again.
All
Is this another week where you're going to be? Be nice?
No, it's going to be one of those.
No?
You don't see it coming.
Oh, okay, that's good. Makes it more exciting.
Makes it much more exciting.
Right.
You know, I'm going to pull a Vin Diesel on you.
Oh yeah.
You know,
I'm walking off the set.
yeah, I can't work.
That's it.
I can't work with him. You know. Anyway, stop bugging Vin. He's my buddy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
Well, speaking of Vin Diesel, we've got a real action star here today. So we're going to talk to a man that's not only living it, but writing about it. So, Mr. Jack Leavers, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Alan.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Wow. So you have quite the life. So a Royal Marine for over 30 years. And now you're in private.
Yeah, I mean, I was a Royal Marine for 9 years. So it's 30 years of military and private security experience. So in fact, the private security experience now is far surpasses the time that I spent in the Corps.
Why would someone leave the Royal Marine and go into private security? Like, is it just better money or a better position? What makes a person do that?
Money. I mean, well, you know what it's like with the military. The guys in the military, or certainly the way it was when I was there in the 80s and 90s, are always talking about what they're going to do next. There's always this grass is always greener kind of feel. And of course, most of the time, you know, you're actually, when you're in the military, it's probably the times you're always going to look back on as the best times. But you always believe there's something amazing around the corner, and you're always hearing rumors of that big contract that's out there. So yeah, I mean, it's just sort of sometimes some of the guys, the best guys in the military actually leave. I mean, a lot of them stay, but sometimes they leave because they don't quite fit into the sort of regimen of the military so well. You know, a bit more free thinking, and a bit more entrepreneurial, and that they get out and, you know, they get involved in, well, especially what's happened since certainly since 2001, since 9/11. You know, the whole world changed private security wise, and there's a lot of opportunities out there, or there certainly were during that first decade. Is it quite a bit different, the two types of service? Like when you're in the military itself, there's one way of living and working, behaving, so to speak, and you go to the private security. Is it a better lifestyle? It is very different. I mean, you've got certainly in Iraq, we worked on Department of Defense contracts. So for Department of Defense, Department of State. So you're quite, constrained by rules and regulations. But fundamentally, the companies are much smaller entities, of course, than the military. When you're part of the big green machine, it's, you're a very small cog in a huge, organization. Whereas in a private security company, often, and I've tended to work with smaller companies, you actually have a huge influence. I mean, whether you're the country manager or you're in a senior position or even a team leader out on the ground, these are guys that are former NCOs rather than officers usually. So they've got command positions that they wouldn't really have in the same way in the military. So when we see these movies on Netflix and places like that, and they're kind of based on private security action going all over, Africa and Europe and different places. Do they get that pretty accurate in the most part? I think there's sort of two different types of sort of private security. There's the big government contracts, when you get some of the, especially on the big American government contracts. I know you've got companies working down in South America and working all across out in the out in the Far East as well. And now that's at a different level to where I've been working. That's a far more organized. You'll see some of the and mixed with OGA and and three data agencies and much closer to the government. That's certainly how it, from my experience, that's how it appears. Whereas, and as I was saying, in Iraq, that was quite organized, and you had various sizes of companies that all sitting there in that space. You go out to Africa, and suddenly it's the Wild West. I mean, you're on your own, and I found even the same in Afghanistan. For me personally, I didn't have much experience over there, but you don't have the same level of support and integration with officialdom. I mean, certainly in Africa, you're riding shotgun around the country really, and making up, liaising yourself and working off of your own initiative to try and get things done, and obviously to try and mitigate risk. Now, as far as the movies, I think a lot of the Netflix and the movies, they do get some of the things right, from what I can tell. But I certainly, when I decided to write a couple of books, I went down the very realistic route, as in I felt that it hadn't quite been shown the way that I understood it, which was small company, very very bespoke projects, that are then, big financial rewards, high risk, high reward. There are some of these things. A lot of these things don't happen. A lot of these things never get the green light. But then some of them, when they do, that's when it gets quite interesting. And there are a lot of those projects probably gone that I certainly would know nothing about. So I'm sure that a lot of things that we see in the movies and on Netflix probably a bit tamer than what's actually happened for real. Because, the truth is obviously usually far more unbelievable than fiction.
Well, when you're writing about private security, just like some military writers have to do you have to, I guess, submit your books for review to whether it be government or to the private security company that you're working for, to have it reviewed to make sure that you're not giving out confidential information, or does it not work like that?
Might do. I didn't. I mean, I didn't work for companies that are big enough, and I don't still work for any companies that would be affected. So for the last, in fact, really for most of the last 20 years, I've been working for very small outfits or working for myself in a consultancy level. So it doesn't really apply. Okay. And I've not been working closely with American, government agencies or British government agencies. So there's no, the confidentiality contracts that I did have to sign when I was in the military don't apply either. Because I have actually worked for an American, I was a VP for an American company as well out in Iraq. So I've sort of worked the British and the American angle for American Department of Defense, Department of State. But those pieces aren't actually, I haven't written about any of that anyway. I mean, I actually, when my first book was set, before I did that, before I actually worked on in the coalition side, if you like, before I worked behind the wire, and then the other book is way out there. It's well away from any officialdom.
What made you go into writing books and about things that you're a part of? Like, what was the catalyst for that?
In 2017, I'd done some work in Yemen. I'd been in Africa. We got caught up with the Ebola thing, so we had a problem. I'd done some work in Yemen, and that was a difficult situation over there. I'd done some work with the Peshmerga. After ISIS, after Daesh rolled into the north of Iraq. Then I'd run a security company over in northern Iraq for a year. And then I got involved in United Nations contracting, as in providing generators, water, pipes, all kinds of things through the UN into northern and southern Iraq, in the reconstruction after Daesh. And I got a bit burnt by a couple of those contracts, and I was waiting for money, and I was basically filled with bitterness and rage about what was happening. And I had to find a vent. I had to find something to put that energy into. And so I thought, well, let me revisit this idea of perhaps writing a book. And that's literally how I did. I just sat down and thought, right, let's just start writing what happened. I knew the start point already because I'd always vowed that's where I'd start a book. And I just started writing. And then I wound a fictional plot into what really happened. And that's sort of that was the first book. It took me about 3 or 4 months to get the first draft out. So I didn't have any long desire to write. In fact, I didn't even think it would be possible. Although I'm quite a good, I've been told I'm quite a good author of reports, of factual reports, of situation reports, of ground truth reporting from countries. In fact, I probably did my sort of writing apprenticeship actually working as an investigator between about 2000 and 2003, where I had a lead investigator in intellectual property anti-counterfeiting who vetted my reports, who edited them, who critiqued them. And there was some very I developed my own style in that. And actually those 3 years was probably where I developed the ability to put some words together. But it was all very much caveated because it's when you're writing investigative reports, it's very different from writing fiction. But that's where that came from, and that's where the idea that I might be able to do it came from. But I never thought I didn't have a clue how you would go about writing a novel. I just sat down and started writing.
Well, that's like a lot of people. That's so now your first book, that was Appetite for Risk.
Yep.
And now that's set after Saddam Hussein is fallen already, I guess, and they're on the rebuild. And now your main character, I guess, is Royal Marine John Pierce.
Yeah.
And he decides to take the opportunity to go to the country when it's rebuilding and perhaps make some money. So let's talk about this idea, and also about John Pierce. Like, who is John Pierce, and where do you get a character like that from? Someone you worked with there, or is it just kind of a combination, or is it you?
Basically, John Pierce was me. I mean, it was actually an alias that I used in a cover company alias. I used at an investigation company. And when I started writing, I just started writing what happened. And I think for all of us, when you go back, especially when you're talking about going back 15 years or longer, even your own memories actually become fictionalized, really. You don't really, I mean, I certainly don't truly actually remember. I mean, it's almost like trying to recall a movie that you've seen anyway. So I put myself back in the position. I've got photographs from the time, and I knew what had happened, and I just started writing the story. Now, I didn't want to write, I didn't have enough, there wasn't enough, it wasn't interesting enough. In fact, it was too complicated to try and do any kind of memoir, to try and do any kind of non-fiction. So the idea was to start writing and then just, wind some fiction into it and try and get a cutoff point in the real story where it could, where it would be a convenient point and a satisfying point to end the novel. Oh,
so you get lots of girls for John Pierce.
Yeah. I mean, well, now the thing is, of course, now what the problem with writing, the problem with writing sort of, and with a character that's based on yourself, is that it becomes very difficult. Where I had the problem, it wasn't really my intention to do that. But the problem was that the point I started from was always going to be, and the moment I decided to write a book was when I was sat in the back of a black Mercedes on a road outside of the British base in Basra Airport, and the Iraqis in the car turned to me and said, "Are you a spy for the Israelis?" Now, the moment they did that, at the end of that day, I thought, if ever I write a book, that will be my opening line. Now, in fact, it didn't end up being the opening line, but that is the opening scene in Appetite for Risk. So I always had a place in my head that I thought I would start writing a book from. The problem is when you've made a bit of a pretty crazy decision to jump in a taxi in Amman and drive to Baghdad in February 2004, it's a bit difficult to try and find a fictional reason why anybody would do that. So I found myself having to use what really happened, and the logic, or the bootneck logic of why I came to that decision. So the more you add in real logic and real decision making, what really happened, the more you have to keep adding that because to keep the whole story coherent and together. The trick was to wind in the fictional side of it. So in fact, the family side and everything else, a lot of that is very, very close to the truth. I mean, in fact, Appetite for Risk is almost, it's fictionalized snapshot of our family life for a couple of years.
So that's pretty exposing in a sense. Like when you put a lot of yourself and your family into something, that in itself has its own type of courage, right? Because you're kind of letting especially nowadays, because anybody in the world now can pick up your book and they can pretty much contact you or find you on the internet nowadays with social media and stuff. So, do you ever worry about that a little bit because you kind of give your own sort of life out here?
To be honest, the feedback that I tend to get for that book is, I remember another author telling me, no, you can't use that as a reason why the guy goes to Iraq. That doesn't make any sense. And I let him carry on. I said, but that was how it happened for real. I couldn't think of another reason why you would jump in a taxi on your own and, with a guy that hardly speaks in English and go to Baghdad. And to be honest, it's so long ago, and I actually now think of the whole story. I almost can't remember. It's difficult sometimes to remember which bits were which bits are fiction and which bits were real because I spent so much time with the book. I look at it more as John's story, not mine. And it's so long ago that there's nothing really that particularly controversial, and certainly not in the bits that are close to what actual real life, real events. The fictionalized stuff doesn't matter because it was fiction, and ultimately it's fiction. So even though there may be a lot of me in there on what happened, I fictionalized enough of it that it makes it does make it fiction. It makes it John Pierce's story and not mine.
Did you discover something about yourself, like when you were writing this part, like especially, okay, you do the first book, it's out there, and you say you kind of weaved it around real events, and it's like remembering a movie, so there's bits and pieces here and there, and you fictionalized it. But I wonder what, at the end of the book, and when you're finished it, and now that it's out, do you sort of realize some things about yourself and about the time you were there writing about this that you didn't at the time? Did you learn something?
I think the biggest thing I took out of it, there were two things. One was how the surprise of how pleased I was to have done it. With regard to things like my dog at the time, who's long gone now, but Taz, alive again in the book. Another thing was that I just had a feeling that it made that period so much more worthwhile than instead of it just being me, sitting in the pub, throwing a few dits around to sort of old oppos. I actually got some use out of some of those crazy times. Getting it into a book. I mean, it was almost like, oh, well, that was some research for a book. But as far as sort of analyzing sort of what I got out of it, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's difficult because it just seems such a stupid thing to have done. I can't really explain it any other way because I was literally sitting in a taxi. You hear these people, you say this and these characters say this in books. I was sitting in a taxi. We'd arrived at the border, at the Iraqi border. I was the only, Westerner there. They probably thought I had a 4x4 outside the security team. It was just me and Thamer in the taxi, and I was on my way into Baghdad, and I just thought, what the hell am I doing? But, I was there, and I just sort of, it was just like on autopilot. It's almost like you've sort of double dog dared yourself to do something, and, you've been talking about it for so long. Well, you need to get up there and do it then. And it's, like I say, and this is why I couldn't really use any other logic in the book other than how it really was. Because I couldn't think of any other reason why someone would do it that really made sense.
Well, did you use a lot of the equipment and weaponry and stuff like that is used in those situations, like in a techno-thriller within this book? No,
I mean, largely at the time, of course, we had mobile phones. Were in by 2004. I had mobile phone. We had internet just about. I did borrow bits of kit from former military guys. I mean, some of the tracking. The piece of tracking equipment in Basra, that was a true story. Sitting in the garden of the Palestine Hotel with my BGAN pointing at the satellites. Again, that was another borrowed piece of kit. So, I did use those. So I didn't include anything that I hadn't personally experienced. But there was quite that 2004, 2005 time was really before you get to the level of, and also the subject matter here didn't really impinge onto that sort of high technical, techno thriller sort of technical side of things. I steered away from the stuff I don't know anything about.
When you wrote this book, the first one, were you thinking about some sort of point that you wanted people to get? Did you want them to get something out of the book other than the action, adventure, and entertainment?
I wouldn't say I wanted them to get it, but I think what it does illustrate, I think it's a real walk through Iraq. I mean, in north, south, and center, with the people, with Iraqis, at the time, it actually, I experienced, from Baghdad and then down in Basra and then up into Kurdistan, those local nationals, the Iraqis that I took, I mean, they were real people. They were real meetings. The general in Baghdad, these people that believed he was going to be called up to the MOD, these people were all real. I mean, these conversations all happened. So it was really, the sort of thing that most people were on the other side. They were inside the camps, they were inside the wire, and we were out. Everything else was the red zone, and I was sort of out just buzzing around with my friends, with the locals. And I think that picture is quite is relatively unique. Now, I also know how ridiculous it seems, and how what happened to some other people that were doing similar to what I was, and they were captured, and the worst things happened to them. So, and it did get scary. I mean, I think the more times you get away with something, you go out there once, you're fine. You go out there twice, you're now on your 10th day. And you're going out and you're doing the same thing, and there's you're channeled through certain entrances, exits, so you're sure there'll be surveillance, and you've got no real security around you, and you start realizing you're taking a hell of a risk, and actually you start getting, the more you get away with it, the more scared you get that you're really running your chances.
What do you think that we get wrong in the public about Iraq, like about the people and the way they live and about what goes on there?
I'm not sure. I think that the chief thing, I mean, I don't know the South so well. And I know the North. I still work in the North. In fact, I might be back into Kurdistan next week. I was there last month. I still see some of the people actually that were in the first book. The chief thing I always found between Iraq and Afghanistan was in Iraq, the people want the same thing that we do. They want a nice school for their kids. They want to go on holiday, but sometimes within the country, often up into Kurdistan for the summer, where it's a bit cooler. They want a good school. They want to go out, walking on to the cafes by the Tigris in the evenings. I mean, that was, they want the same as we do in the West. I mean, it's a very recognizable society, and of course, religion wasn't a big thing under Saddam. In fact, he obviously suppressed it for a long time until after the 91 Gulf War, when he tried to embrace it to rally support within the country. Whereas in Afghanistan, I think a lot of the people want to be left alone to do the things their way, and don't really, I'm talking outside of Kabul, and so you've got an almost impossible, you had an almost impossible problem where you were trying to force what you believe is better for a lot of the population that they don't necessarily want. But I didn't really know Afghanistan so well. So I mean, that's not really my fiefdom. I know some people that actually far preferred, Afghanistan. I had a good friend of mine, and he couldn't stand Iraq, and everything that he was doing was in Afghanistan. But for me, with the Kurds, I mean, they are Western friend. I mean, not just Western friendly. I mean, they're genuinely allies really for us. I mean, I'm talking about the Iraqi Kurds. Obviously, there are Syrian Kurds, Turkish Kurds, Iranian Kurds. It's that's just got its own huge problems. geopolitically. But certainly in northern Iraq, I've always felt amongst friends. In fact, it's probably the place that puts the biggest smile on my face is when I fly into Sulaymaniyah. I mean, it's like where I live, except safer. So it's like where I live south of London, except safer, and I've got more security around me and with better weather.
Less rain.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Now you went on, and now you've got a new book that just come out, I believe. It's
Sure.
just out now, and it's called "Don't Play Dead with the Vultures. If you got it to go hard." That's my saying. Go hard. So this is 4 years later. This happens, and what was kind of the progress? You decided that you would bring back your Marine John Pierce, and you're going to go into a new situation. How did that come about?
Well, funnily enough, I was in Iraq running convoys in 2007. No, sorry, in summer 2008, and I did get lured into Africa. So the sort of spine of the story, if you like, I think that Don't Play Dead with Vultures is far more of it's fictional flesh on a skeleton of real events, real life. Especially with the timelines. So I was in the places doing some of the things that are in the book, but a lot of the scenes that may have occurred for real in some context aren't in the context and with the characters as that are described in the book. In Appetite for Risk, nearly all or most of the characters, probably 2/3 of Appetite for Risk happen for real. In Don't Play Dead with Vultures, it's far, far more fictionalized. I realized very early on that I had to fictionalize all the characters. Appetite for Risk was a guy going out and although there were a lot of other characters around, a lot of them are ancillary characters that don't really, they help him to move here, move there. In Don't Play Dead with Vultures, there were going to be far more characters that had a meaningful input, that were important characters in the story, and I couldn't use real people for that. It pigeonholed, or it narrowed what I could do with them, because I mean straight away I realized that I couldn't use guys that I'd worked in the company with on the convoys, because immediately I could only think of them and what they would say or what they had said, and I couldn't move outside of that. So I had to fictionalize it. And the moment I fictionalized all the characters, and there are also some characters actually that are literally too unbelievable for fiction that were involved for real. So that I knew were just ridiculous. I couldn't put them in. So once I'd fictionalized nearly everybody else around John Pierce, then I could use that framework of try and keep that visceral sort of reality sitting someone in the car alongside the main character, alongside the characters, but completely fictionalize it, and have these real life incidents happening, but in different contexts with different people at different times than how they happen for real. So it has this thread of real life that drives the story forward, and is the reason why it's such a long book. Actually, it's far longer than I intended, but it gives it again. It keeps it coherent. It gives it depth. And that's how I feel, and my intention was always to sit the character alongside John Pierce, and right, this is how it works. This is what it's like to be in these places doing these things.
Well, as you began, fictionalizing these characters and writing, how did you experience your characters? Could you hear them? Could you hear their voices? Was it more like a movie in your head? How does that work for you?
To be honest, when I was writing, especially this with Don't Play Dead with Vultures, it took me it was far longer time to write it, and I really sort of lived inside it in the book. I mean, as in, it was almost like exactly the same as when I'm reading a book. When you're so engaged, the sort of book that you just want to get back to and start reading it again. You're right in amongst it, and I was experiencing that, but as the author, that's how I felt. So I wouldn't say I was hearing the characters or I was seeing it. I was just experiencing it. And of course, I was writing about places where, in 2008, I was in these places and I was doing very similar things. And I was just merging them in with these characters and making decisions, as John Pierce making decisions and, almost like gaming it. I've played a few war games and bits and pieces over the years, almost like red teaming it. You throw a problem in, but I already had an outline, so I knew where we were going. But it was always, the goal was actually a what if that was proposed to me at the time in 2010, and that was the end game, was this fictionalized what if. Imagine if it had actually happened, and throwing a whole lot of issues at the guys. So yeah, I live inside it. I mean, but of course what that means is that when I'm writing, it's not that I have to write perfectly, but I have a very clean first draft because it needs to be right. As in, and not each word, but it needs to be right in order for me to be enjoying the story, to have that foundation to then move forward from. So I tend to be quite slow and steady, and just sort of, like I say, it's like spending a year inside a book, but inside the story.
Right.
And that's how it works for me anyway. That's, I speak it out loud, and, and I'll have the conversation. I mean, the sort of the dialogue between characters is quite easy, because that's exactly, it might not be exactly the dialogue I've had, but it would be it's exactly the dialogue I would have or have experienced or similar to in those kind of situations over the years. So I found that relatively straightforward and enjoyable. Some of the characters are loosely inspired by genuine people that were there at the time. I've changed nationalities, or I've made them different enough so I wasn't constrained by the real person. But like I say, that gave it the sort of the foundation to write from. It gave it that route, that pathway. So I never deviated too far away from it. Some of of course, the anecdotal type stories that are thrown in, they give it that feeling of realism. That and I'm looking at things and I'm thinking, well, yeah, that sort of happened, but it happened to somebody else, a year later, or it happened a year before in a totally different environment. But because in that realism, when you put in those characters, and so I didn't have to think up too many things. I just threw in something, right, that really happened, but now imagine it happening to these characters. So it was really good fun. I mean, I really, really enjoyed writing this one.
You mustn't outline then. Do you kind of, when you sat down to do this book too, did you kind of know where it was going to end? Do you kind of know that ahead of time?
Yeah, I mean, I did outline this, but but with a sort of, like I say, this framework. So I knew where it was going, but in quite loose. I mean, you're talking about. I mean, some people write 20,000 and 30,000 word outlines, these kind of things. I had a couple of A4 pages with notes on, bullet points, so I know where it's going, and that's getting adjusted all the time. And I had to, I left it quite open, a bit like red teaming, war gaming it. Right, if this happens, right, well, unfortunately somebody's going down. This kind of thing. And I was quite, it was quite. Having spent so much time, sort of almost feeling like you're part of the team, and that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted people to read, to feel like, as though they, they'd had the passport stamped and they'd been in and out of Guinea and riding with the team, and experiencing these things. And if you feel something for the characters, then of course it makes any tension, any risk, any threat, and certainly any serious incidents that much more tangible, that much more emotional for anybody that's reading. And I felt that the same when I was writing it, even though these weren't real people. I probably felt more emotional writing the second book with the fictional characters than I did in the first book, which was just doing things from memory.
Well, that's because real people are awful.
That's right.
Fictional people are easier to like. It's like a pet. Much easier.
Yeah.
Do you write from John Pierce's point of view then?
I do, and that's having written these two books. That's of course that becomes a constraint in itself, with the first book being so closely aligned to things that happened to me. I mean, I say it isn't me; it's John Pierce. It is somebody different. But having used that, and having used the sort of family setup, which was very similar to my own, because that influenced so much of the decision making at the time. So again, it was difficult to separate it off. It does mean that it constrains sort of ideas for a third book, where I've been considering whether to write another John Pierce book, or whether to write a completely different different set of characters, and standalone, with serious potential, of course, as they always say. And I'm just, looking at that at the moment. There was something that was proposed to me in early 2020 that I'm thinking of writing a what if, sort of punchy thriller about, but I'm not quite sure how to approach that at the moment.
Don't make it. It was all a dream. Get politically correct. John Pierce is coming back. Or he's going to transition into Janice or something. And then he's going to go back and do it again, but under a different identity. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, it's, to be honest, in the last few days, I've had two ideas. There was a third book that I was always going to write because I spent 2011 and 12. I spent a couple of years on the counter-piracy stuff in the Indian Ocean off the Somali coast. I say off the Somali coast. I mean, Indian Ocean can be a long way off the Somali coast. Depends where you're going. But bouncing around between Sri Lanka and Oman and Egypt and South Africa, protecting the bulkers and the tankers from pirates. And I still intend to write a book about that. And that was going to be a sort of third John Pierce book, but I'm now wondering whether to roll that out and do something slightly different, because it needs to be third person, multi-viewpoint. I need to hit it a completely different way. And when you look at books like, books like Red Metal, Mark Graney and Rip Rawlings, excellent book, where you see almost like an old style, almost like Red Storm Rising style books, where you're seeing these multiple points of view, of a big international thriller where incidents occur. And of course, with that's war, but I had quite a big sort of idea, and so I'm looking at various ways of approaching it. But I'm not a full-time writer at all, and I'm a convenience writer. I write when I feel like it. I'm a bit more of like a Hank Moody in Californication type of writer. I write when I write. He's my inspiration. I write when I really feel like writing, rather than sitting to any big schedule. But of course, once you get in the story, you actually want to write. You want to get down there, and you want to sit down. But to be honest, even on a daily basis, I'm happy if the stories move forward, even if it's moved forward because I've thought of something new rather than how many words I've written. I mean, a lot of people write 1,000 words a day, 2,000 words a day, they do. And then they say they write 5 days a week, and you think, well, every year you're writing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words. So, and it works for them. But for me, I'm a lot fewer words. But when I do get them down, like I say, I try to make sure they're the right, or as closer to the right ones, or certainly the right story, as possible.
It's more important that way anyway, than just have a volume. Now your character, so have you developed him enough that people know who he is by these two books, do you think?
I think the second book, I mean, they just had a blog tour for the last couple of weeks, and I've been, I really didn't know what the reception would be like. Because it's a long book, obviously it's a thriller in first person. It actually, and a lot of it does feel has quite a third person feel to it, because I've used communications to be able to provide effectively beyond visual range sort of ability to understand what's going on, to paint a bigger picture. But one of the things that has really come out is, even though I don't describe characters, I hardly ever actually give physical descriptions, is the bloggers that have reviewed the book saying how well developed and how they could literally, I mean, one of the, saying as though they could see him in front of them, as though he stood right there, kind of thing. So, and as far as actually developing the character and his persona and everything, I mean, again, this is something that these initial reviews are all really singing about, and the same with descriptions. I had with an early critique of Appetite for Risk, I was told, well, you need to just up the description level a little bit, because you might have driven down a dusty road heading towards Basra, but none of these readers have. And this was a guy saying to me, you need to just put a little bit more in. And I don't do much in the way of descriptive writing, as in flowery descriptive writing. But it's one of those things that the first book the people were talking about how the visceral sort of nature. I mean, I had somebody talking about the second book saying it was like being in virtual reality. That sort of what I went for. That's what I was trying to do was sit people down in an unusual situation and actually sort of experience, not just in the second book, not just with John Pierce, but with the whole gang, with the crew, with the team. It's a much wider cast, really, of important characters in the second book.
How do you decide who you're going to kill off? Do you kind of take a person that you've met that you don't like, and then decide, well, listen, this is going to be the guy that dies?
No.
In fact, let's get
the problem? Well, what happened with this one was I actually had earmarked some people for the Grim Reaper that managed to survive it. and that was just, and again, that was almost like as though, running an exercise. I mean, almost like wargaming it, and oh dear, he didn't, he survived it and he didn't, kind of thing. And that's what I went with. I didn't rethink it. I didn't, in fact, even with the editing, the reason why it took me quite a long time to finish the book, I'd finished the first draft within a year, but it took me another year to do the editing, was because when I edited, I was going through, giving a careful read through and making notes and then editing. And then I would leave it for 3 months and not even look at it again, because I didn't want to overread the book. I didn't want to analyze too hard the change. I didn't want to suck out the sort of the initial sort of energy of it, if you like. So I then do another big edit, and then 3 months later I was picking up. And there wasn't any kind of preordained technique. It was just the way it worked. And it means that even now, I'm not sick of the book. I'd actually, I read it, the paperback, when I got mine delivered, and I sat down and read it, mainly because I wanted to check there wasn't a typo on page 1. Because that's the one thing you always want, and it's the one thing I always used to say. In fact, a guy I bumped into on the road in Suleiman in a cafe at Dukan, and he said, "Oh, Mr. John, the one thing you always told me," because he'd been promoted, he said, is don't screw up on the first day. Because, of course, especially when you're running convoys or PSD tasks or anything else, anything could go wrong on any mission. And so my mantra was always, do not screw it up today. Just don't do it on the first day, because that's the day the client will always remember. You mark your card with it. And so, I did the same with the book. You're sort of reading through and thinking, let's get through the first chapter. Then let's get through part 1. Right, let's get through part 2. Just hoping that you're not going to see that terrible blooper. Unfortunately, there's one thing, but it's not actually a mistake. It was a proofreading change that was made that I didn't pick up. That I got changed then for the Kindle. But and I also make sure in both my books now I have one use of the Americanized verb behoove. And that's my friend Greg, who's a former Green Beret. I worked for his company out in Baghdad. He was always behooving. It would behoove us. We were always behooving a lot of things. So I stuck one in. In fact, the character Greg in the first book is actually is a description of Greg, of Greg Holmes, who I know. And so I've decided every book I ever write will always have one use of the verb behoove. And of course, the proofreader in the first book tried to change it to some British behove or something.
Yeah.
So I have to look at the first thing I do when I get a proofreading back is check and see whether they've changed my behoove.
Yeah, just to put a little note at the beginning. Do not change.
I did. For this one, I did. I said there is a single use of the verb behoove, and it is intentional. Leave it alone.
When you're writing, you just go play it by ear. You don't sit down and clear time and do it and all that. You are just going by how you feel.
Well, to be honest, I mean, sort of. What was happening with a lot of when I was finishing off Don't Play Dead with Vultures, it was I'd actually shifted positions in the house. So I don't work in my office because I still work with the Middle East. Then I tend to do work early on, from early in the morning, and then by the afternoon, once everything's cleared, that's when I'll sit down and aim to sort of just as it begins to fall asleep, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, start to write, and then write till sort of 6. That would be, and I got into quite a pattern of that. But funnily enough, when I'm overseas, I tend to write in the mornings because no one's up, because they're all late up. So I tend to get up early and write on a rickety kitchen table somewhere. But I do tend to get into a rhythm. It's just that a lot of writers are right. I mean, they're like proper writers. I mean, is their calling, and that's what they do, which means they need to write every day, and absolutely, that's how I am when I'm in a book. But if I'm not writing a book, I mean, I'm still, I didn't start writing until I was 49 for the Appetite for Risk, and so I still have the belief that if you're writing something down, then it means you're working. So, I don't really think, I wouldn't say I even enjoy writing. I just have some stories that are good fun, that I'm, that I've effectively writing the books you want to read. And in fact, and the other thing is when I write, I read more. I'm a voracious reader, even more when I'm writing a book. I know a lot of authors don't like to read when they're writing. I read so much. It inspires me to be reading good books. It inspires me to be writing more.
And you read the same type of genre you're writing in?
Yeah. I read anything. But I mean, I tend to, I do tend to read similar books. I mean, a lot of spy fiction, but I mean psychological thrillers and military thrillers. I mean, sort of Don Bentley, Jack Carr, Rip Rawlings, Mark Greaney, to Charles Cummings, John le Carré, all just whatever. I mean, Paul Vidic, sort of everything. I just read as much as I can. I mean, I've always got a paperback and an audio book and a Kindle book on the go all the time anyway, but even more so when I'm writing. I just find that I have to clear my mind of the book, almost the actual words on the page, and just read something else, because you've got it going through your head so many other times, walking the dog or training in the gym or anything else. The book's always there. So it's good to get those chances to fill your head with something else. And especially, and appreciate other great stories. There's nothing better than a book that you absolutely love that you just can't wait to get back into. I think it's so, you can go through a few books that are good books and you read them and they're great. And then you get one and you think, this is why I love reading. And this year in January, I read two fantastic books. There was Bomber by Len Dayton, which is a 24 hours of a fictional bombing raid by the RAF over Germany. But it's not just it's from both sides. It's from the side on the ground in England, in Germany, and in the bomber crews. And an even better book that I read straight after that was Stephen Pressfield's The Afghan Campaign. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. It's absolutely what I would not expect to like. It's ancient, which I just would say I don't read. It's first person present tense. I mean, it just sounds, it's a non-starter. And it's about a soldier in Alexander's army. And it's fantastic. It's an epic story. And I absolutely loved it. It's one of my top 10 books. I thought it was fantastic. And in fact, Stephen Pressfield's book, Killing Rommel, which was set in the Second World War, about an SAS patrol targeting Rommel, was also another fantastic book. So, I hadn't read any of his before, those two, and they are two brilliant books. But yeah, I mean, it only inspires you even more when you read something that's fantastic. Everybody's looking at you. Whenever you pick up a book, you're hoping this is going to be the one that's just going to, you're just going to devour.
Now, do you have yourself set up on a website, and do you have like social media things? Do you like to interact with readers? Where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a website that's now probably slightly out of date because obviously the second book's come out. I mean, there is bits and pieces on it, but it's slowly being updated, and that's at jackleavers.com. I am on Twitter. I do a bit of Facebook, but it's not my natural sort of habitat, and God knows what I do on Instagram, because I haven't got a clue what half of that stuff is. I mean, right, I get these posts and then it says, do you want to post this to your story? So I just click yes, and I've got no idea what's going on.
See what happens.
But I do have a address. I'm at Jack Leavers on Twitter, and in Facebook I think it's at Jack Leavers author. But I mean, yeah, so I am around. I'm around and about, and readers can get in touch. And yeah, I had a couple of guys actually acknowledged in the book. One of them was for this is the second book in WW Vultures, and one of them was a Canadian pilot who I'm hoping I haven't screwed up when he reads the section that he advised me on. I mean, literally, of course, they give you all this advice and technical and everything else, and we chat about it. And of course, it turns into about, five lines or 2 lines in a paragraph in the book. And the same thing for a master sniper that I know. All his advice and all the discussions we had in it, I think it comes, the actual technical specifics is literally the name of the weapon, and that's probably about all that was included. Although the usage was something separately. So I'm actually quite scared now because they're both reading the book, I think, at the moment. So I'm waiting for the abuse to start flying, and also from any readers in Australia, because there's an important Australian character, and so I'm sure I'm going to get some sledging from them for my awful Aussie slang. Although I'll be blaming the Aussies that I used to work with, because that's who I picked that all up from.
Oh, well, I'll be fine. Just watch out for that sniper. The sniper.
That's right.
That's the danger. Well, this is interesting. We'll have all that up on the website as well. People can find you then, hunt you down. Writing over these situations, you're writing out, and you're in these countries, and you're doing all these things, and I just wonder if how tension affects you. Does it sort of, when you get stressed or upset, does it sort of work against you when you write? Yeah,
it does. But I think the biggest, for all the things that happen physically and the difficulties you have, people used to talk to me about Baghdad, about going down Route Irish, these kind of things. And I wasn't PSD running down Irish at the worst of the times or anything. I'm not, But what I used to say to them is, we might be traveling around, Baghdad, and it's a relatively high threat. However, we're wearing body armor, we're in B6 armored vehicles, we're tooled up to the nines, we're equipped for it. You're actually, the actual threat, and the risk to yourself, your vulnerability is far higher when you're downtown at 2:00 in the morning in any major city on your own, stumbling around after having a few beers, sort of heading home. You're vulnerable then. And there's a lot of places in South America and in Africa, in Europe, everywhere, where the vulnerability is heavy. But those kind of things you can cope with. I can cope with. The difficulty, I think, the hardest thing is actually financial stress and pressures. And I found in 2004, and about around the time when when the book set, I was under massive sort of financial pressure, and that was scary. That really was scary, until it's so bad that you realize that there's no choice. You can't go back to a normal job anymore. You're so deep in that basically you've got a twist, and you've got to go for it. And that's sort of what happened to me in 2004, and it still happens to me now. And actually, it's the financial side of things. It's that desire to get secure. And unfortunately, my biggest fault is I'm a high, not gambler as in on the horses or the cards, but I take risks, business risks, financial risks. Okay, they're physical risks, but I go all in with these high risk, high reward, situations where you end up on a precipice, and that pressure is the hardest pressure. And of course, the way I look at it is that I have a potential big win on the other side, whereas there's a lot of people, especially now with the economic downturn that's affecting certainly the UK, I'm sure the US is the same, where people, they're without hope really of how they're going to get out of the situation. So a lot of the time I'm just grateful for what I've got, and that I might be, standing on the precipice looking down, but I've got a good chance that I'm going to make it over the other side and come up smelling the roses. And so far, it's always happened. Somehow, I've always pulled out the bag. The next contract has come along, or you've got the win on something. But that kind of pressure, I think, is worse than anything that you get in the, for me anyway, in the military or in the private sort of security sector. But then I haven't been stuck in a firebase out in Afghan, for 6 months. And I'm sure the pressure for the guys, friends of mine that were out there in those situations, I didn't have that. I've obviously served in other situations, but it's much more transitory when you're in private security, or for me it was mobile operations. You're running PSD, you're running convoys, you're in, out, you've got a plan. You can say, yep, success, done that. When you're launching patrols out of a firebase, in some IED ridden valley, for 6 months, that pressure's got to be absolutely horrendous. And of course but yeah, I think the financial side is the one thing that will keep me awake at night. and make it difficult for me. But then until it turns into anger, and then I start writing another book.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Anger
that's
and
it.
frustration, because most of the time it's because I haven't been paid by somebody. Usually somebody in some far-flung corner of the world where I then have to go and hunt them down and try to get my money.
No, shoot them. Come on, and it's not like you're the pressure of waiting in the Starbucks drive-thru and being late for work. Now that is pressure. Jeez. Well, anyway, it's certainly interesting. So everyone, our guest today has been Jack Leavers, and we've been talking about his 2 books. Of course, the new one is Don't Play Dead with Vultures. If you've got to go hard. And of course, we got to keep him out of financial trouble. So everyone, get out there and buy a book. Keep him going. He doesn't have to go out and hunt down people anymore. So, Mr. Jack Leavers, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. It's been great.
Thanks, Jack.
Yep, thanks, David.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.